certain you're familiar with the term thalassophobia. It has gained significant attention on the internet in recent years, and rightfully so. You see, a phobia typically characterizes an irrational or exaggerated fear. However, I can assure you that there's nothing irrational about fearing the sea. It's a literal abyss, vast, immeasurably deep, and incredibly dark. The extreme pressure, absence of light, and numerous other hostile conditions make it a place that warrants apprehension. Interestingly, despite this, thousands of people go diving annually, and many embark on cruises, not to mention those who have careers involving deep-sea submarine exploration for research or military purposes. Now, the two incidents I'm about to recount are experiences I've kept to myself for an extended period. Yet you'll soon comprehend that sharing these things with friends, family, or even a therapist would be problematic, as I'd risk being branded as unstable. It all began during my elementary school years, probably around 4th grade. Apologies if certain details appear hazy. It's been more than 3 decades. I had been attending an after-school swim course for several weeks. Eventually, I passed the test that granted access to the deep end of the pool, which descended to about 11 feet at its deepest point. My motivation for venturing there was that my then coolest-in-the-world friends were already taking deep-end lessons. So you can imagine my elation when I attended my first class and found my name on the deep-end lesson schedule. The initial moments proceeded routinely. The instructors outlined the day's plans and introduced a game we could play if we maintained good behavior during the lessons. Quite the challenge for a bunch of rambunctious elementary school students, but well, kids will be kids. My initial task was refining my diving technique. One by one, we mounted the starting blocks, executed our dives, and received feedback from the instructors to enhance our form. I was filled with an overwhelming sense of excitement, tinged with a touch of nervousness. Throughout the instructor's detailed list of directions, my gaze kept drifting beyond her to the edge of the pool. The water had a profound cobalt blue hue, its clarity contrasting strangely with its murky appearance. The underwater lights further illuminated its eerie depths. Despite my unease, I dismissed it as mere apprehension. It was just a pool. What could possibly go wrong? When my turn finally arrived, my friends cheered me on as I positioned myself in the best form possible. Peering downward, I observed the patient blue expanse waiting for me. Yet something felt amiss. I couldn't pinpoint it, but an unsettling sensation lingered. Nevertheless, I was the center of attention, and I couldn't afford to delay the class. Summoning my courage, I lunged into the dive. The crashing sound of my entry distorted as I descended below the water's surface. The water's coolness embraced my skin, and I closed my eyes, relishing the euphoria of the depth. But I knew I couldn't linger for too long, lest the instructor reprimand me. As I opened my eyes with the intention of resurfacing, I involuntarily let out a startled gasp. The surface above me didn't appear to be just a few feet away. It seemed to stretch for over 40 feet or more. My mind struggled to comprehend this impossibility, and panic began to surge within me. My anxiety heightened as I glanced both below and around me. Instead of pool walls or tiles, I was surrounded by an unending expanse of cobalt blue. The void stretched out in every direction. This couldn't be right. At this depth, my ears should have popped, and I should have felt the pressure on my body. Yet there I floated. I dared to look downward, a decision that haunted me with a horror and stress that I'm certain aged me prematurely. Beneath me, it was impossible to gauge the depth of the water, whether it plunged hundreds, thousands, or tens of thousands of feet down. All I could perceive was the gradual descent of blue, growing darker and darker until it transformed into a pitch-black void. A true and tested abyss, and there I found myself suspended right in its middle. The passage of time was merely a matter of several seconds, yet those moments stretched into minutes within the silent depths. I quickly shifted my focus back to the surface and began to kick fervently, propelling myself upward with desperation. Bubbles surfaced, momentarily obscuring my vision as I unleashed futile cries for help, beseeching any benevolent deity to heed my plea for escape from the horrifying nightmare I had stumbled into. Every kick, every stroke was a struggle for survival. The most distressing part, my own pleas for my mother's aid barely reached my own ears. The surface appeared to recede with every effort, while the certainty of my own drowning loomed nearer. my lungs seared with pain, and I felt my grip on consciousness slipping as I watched my hand futilely grasp and clutch at the surface, as if imploring for mercy. I believed that would mark my demise, that I would perish then and there, and my lifeless body would drift in the blue and black abyss. Once again my eyelids drooped, this time far less willingly, the excruciating constriction in my lungs intensified by the second. Just as darkness was encroaching upon my vision, just as I prepared for my final plea to echo, an abrupt and recognizable sensation struck me, breaking through the water's surface. But there was more. Hands gripped my shoulders, fingers pressing insistently against my flesh as they hauled me upward with determined force. Upon reopening my eyes, I beheld a sight that both comforted and profoundly bewildered me. It was the ceiling of the indoor pool I had been in just minutes before. A stern yet feminine voice pierced through my muffled ears as I began to cough and expel water. That was a reckless act that could have ended far worse. You shouldn't remain submerged for such extended periods after diving. You're benched for the rest of the day. It was my swimming instructor's voice. Absently, I absorbed her words as I pressed my palms against the solid pool room floor, the unyielding tiles beneath my hands offering a gratifying solace I hadn't thought possible. "Jackson, did you hear me? You're finished for the rest of the day," she scolded. However, I was far too overwhelmed with terror and confusion to genuinely care about the reprimand I had just received. What I did manage to grasp was that I had just encountered something extremely strange and inexplicable, an undeniable call of the void. Later that same day, when I returned home and attempted to recount the experience to my parents, they dismissed it with laughter, attributing it to the vivid imagination of a young child. I suppose I should have anticipated that reaction. Nonetheless, I learned from that encounter, which is why I've kept it to myself until now. I can't entirely fault my parents or anyone else for their skepticism. After all, I found it difficult to believe despite being the one who lived through it. The days following the incident were challenging. I immediately quit the swimming class, much to the chagrin of my parents and friends. In addition to that, I took pains to steer clear of any significantly large bodies of water. Not that I had many nearby. Pools, lakes, and rivers were off limits for me if I happened to come across them. As for bathing, I limited myself to showers only, no baths. This persisted for quite a while. I did my best to bury the memory as deep as possible in the recesses of my mind. Yet here I am, recounting it all to you. Clearly my efforts were in vain. Other than my newfound apprehension toward any water deeper than a few inches, my life continued relatively normally. I completed elementary school and transitioned to middle school. I made friends, embarked on trips, found myself in trouble, and underwent a standard journey through the initial years of my teenage existence. Things were going rather smoothly, and I had nearly succeeded in moving past the experience. That is, until the second incident unfolded. You see, not long after concluding the 8th grade, my grandmother passed away. This event hit me quite deeply. I held only fond memories of her, and she held me in high regard as her grandson. She was a loving, gentle, and respectable woman. A part of me was content that she could finally reunite with my grandfather. His passing a few years earlier had clearly affected her. They both served as remarkably positive role models during my early life. She had always excelled at maintaining a positive and cheerful disposition. Yet every now and then, she would allow herself to falter, which was entirely understandable. By all accounts, he had been an exceptional husband to her, as relayed by my mother, and a caring father as well. Approximately a week subsequent to her passing, my circle of friends during that period invited me to their house for a pool party. To my astonishment, I didn't really contemplate before agreeing. I believed that engaging socially might be beneficial. Engaging in some enjoyment and diverting my thoughts from grief seemed like a sound plan. The initial incident had mostly receded into the recesses of my mind, though encountering images or videos depicting deep water still stirred unease within me. I had ceased attempting to find rational explanations for what transpired. You see, my friend had a strong affinity for swimming, and his parents were quite affluent, which led me to wonder why he wasn't enrolled in a private school. The pool they possessed had a depth exceeding 9 feet at its lowest point, allowing for the installation of a diving board. It was meticulously maintained and appeared superior to most public pools. The water bore a sapphire blue hue that was nearly euphoric to behold. Upon arriving at the party, a mild tingling sensation emerged in my stomach as the pool came into direct view. However, as I engaged in conversations and banter with my friends, this sensation gradually abated. Naturally, I refrained from entering the pool for a while, opting to stay on the pavement a few feet away, clutching a cup of punch, and conversing with my peers at the time. It wasn't until my long-standing crush at that juncture, Jennifer, began to playfully mock my reluctance that I genuinely contemplated entering the pool. After all the time that had elapsed, it was peer pressure that ultimately nudged me. "Come on, Jackson. You'll transform into dust if you just linger up there," she jestingly taunted, gazing up at me with an expression encompassing both curiosity and subtle mischief. I grinned, attempting to maintain a composed demeanor, a pretense that dissipated rapidly as a few other friends joined Jennifer in a playful chant. "Jump in, Jackson, jump in, Jackson, jump in, Jackson," their voices reverberated. And so I ambled to one of the tables, placed my cup down, pivoted, and then, without allowing further hesitation, executed a sprinting jump, cannonballing into the water. It had been a considerable duration since the sensation of submersion had greeted me. However, the lukewarm water proved remarkably comforting, a revitalizing shift from the sweltering and humid weather I had endured throughout that day. Naturally, as I cannonballed into the pool, I closed my eyes just before propelling myself off the edge of the pavement. The moment I broke through the water's surface, I kept my eyes shut for a brief pause, mimicking my previous experience. Descending a few feet, I anticipated returning to the surface promptly. I hadn't forgotten how to swim since the initial incident years ago. Upon opening my eyes, however, a surge of dread engulfed me, causing my heart to plummet into my stomach, which churned in response. Gazing downward, there was nothing but water, no tile, concrete, or any semblance of ground. Only an endless black abyss over which I hovered. A scream escaped me involuntarily, reminiscent of a terrified child, which in a way I was. Yet I remained suspended, realizing that I had reawakened a nightmare I believed I had left behind. Panicked, I glanced upward and recognized the familiar scenario of being submerged roughly 40 feet below the surface, as in my prior encounter. Despite my heightened anxiety, I wasted no time and immediately initiated a desperate swim towards the surface, hoping for a more favorable outcome this time. My frantic ascent was abruptly halted within seconds by an unforeseen obstruction, a sight that confounded both my mind and my eyes. On either side of me, I beheld a towering arrangement of grayish squares, forming a complete 360-degree enclosure. Each segment of this wall appeared to be more than 100 feet away from my position. Gradually acclimating to the conditions, I discerned the details with increasing clarity. I stole a fleeting glance downward, an action that cost me precious moments. The wall extended downward, encompassing the abyss beneath my feet. Looking upwards once more, I observed that the portion of the wall closer to the water's surface curved slightly inward, resembling a hyperboloid shape. At that moment, I wasn't rationally dissecting the intricacies of my predicament. Rather, I was swiveling my head in frenzied attempts to comprehend my nightmarish surroundings. As time ticked away and my lungs strained for air, I acknowledged the urgency of the situation, leaving no room for answers. In hindsight, I should have continued my ascent without a second thought, foregoing any further glances downward. This might have been the case if not for a chilling sound that reached my ears, freezing my blood as if I were submerged in icy Arctic waters. "Jackson." A feeble, withered feminine voice resonated through the water surrounding me. The clarity of it seemed too uncanny for it to arise from the environment I was ensnared in. It resembled a call from an empty corridor, rather than emanating from over 36 feet underwater. In that moment, I grappled with confusion and an inability to process. I merely cast a gaze beneath me while continuing to ascend, my legs propelling me with greater force as anxiety surged. The ache in my chest was ambiguous. Whether it stemmed from constricted lungs or a threat of bile surging from my esophagus remained indistinguishable. Likely a blend of both. "Jackson, don't depart, Jackson," the voice reiterated, once more startlingly distinct and easily comprehensible. This enabled me to identify the origin, both the who and the where. Progressing toward the surface, I cast my glance downward, and amidst my moving feet, I was confronted with a distressing spectacle. Several dozen feet beneath, a figure resembling my recently departed grandmother, or something akin to her, came into view. She was ensnared by a thick metallic chain coiled around her ankles, impeding any vertical motion. Her eyes were entirely obscured as though rendered in chalk, her skin profoundly creased. Her disheveled white tresses floated around her head, conveying an almost Medusa-like semblance. I acknowledged that this wasn't truly her. It was merely another facet of this waking nightmare that I so fervently yearned to escape. Yet akin to the previous occurrence, my ascent toward the surface mirrored my previous ordeal. My lungs constricted fiercer, and my grasp on awareness wavered as darkness encroached. I resisted the agony, a genuine effort, but it proved insufficient, a realization I understood, yet was reluctant to embrace. Several seconds elapsed, and all succumbed to blackness, a straightforward, agonizing extinguishing. Dissimilar from the prior instance where I had sensed myself breach the water's surface, subsequently succumbing to a bout of coughing, I instead jolted awake, abruptly confronted by the night sky. Starlight bathed me as I gazed upward. Solid pavement met my back and legs. Upon surveying left and right, I encountered my friend, the host of the pool gathering, along with several other attendees flanking me. Their expressions were marked by assorted shades of concern, and thus, in an instant, I found myself precisely where I had initiated. The weeks that followed were a mixture of confusion and uncertainty, to say the least. I participated in my grandmother's funeral, yet throughout that period, I couldn't shake the image of the monstrous version of her that I had witnessed in the abyss. It might sound harsh, but I can't deny that I didn't feel overwhelming sadness when it was all over. Despite that initial reaction, I will forever hold cherished memories of her in my heart, characterized by love and respect. However, the purpose behind this phenomenon, its message to me, remained elusive. At a certain point, I believed I might decipher its intent, yet over the years, well into my adulthood, I discovered nothing substantial. Neither answers nor concrete evidence emerged to prove that my experience was anything but isolated. I pored over countless books and websites in my quest, recognizing that it might not have constituted the most thorough investigation, but it was my attempt. What I couldn't comprehend was why this was transpiring solely within my reality. Were there imperceptible forces at play? Was this a form of retribution for some past transgression? I recognized that after the second occurrence it was centered around me, specifically me, not the pool or the water, but my being. I wasn't one to buy into the concept of curses, but that certainty was shaken. Why did this commence so abruptly? What trigger had been pulled that subjected me to this torment every time I immersed myself in water? After all, I had been swimming regularly for months prior to that initial incident. This frustration, this sense of hopelessness stemming from the lack of answers or solutions, felt suffocating. Even connecting with just one other person grappling with the same ordeal would have offered a semblance of relief. Yet the void remained. The anomaly persisted without explanation. It's as if something odd had targeted me, and the universe was unwilling to extend the courtesy of an explanation for why or how. On another note, I delved deeper into the history of thalassophobia. While it didn't boast an abundance of materials akin to other fears like arachnophobia or claustrophobia, it still provided ample content to occupy my time. I sifted through the anticipated resources, aged accounts and documented logs from sailors and maritime crews, maritime myths such as Moby Dick and the Kraken. But what truly captured my attention were depictions of the deep sea. Whether these were genuine photographs or photorealistic artwork, they evoked an odd blend of discomfort and morbid curiosity within me. I perused numerous images of the abyssal depths, and each instance felt like I was gazing directly into an abyss that was reciprocating the gaze. You might assume that given my experiences, the last thing I'd want to encounter would be such imagery. Nonetheless, I couldn't shake the feeling that it held a message, as if the impenetrable depths were attempting to communicate something to me. The question of my sanity crept in. Perhaps I was on the brink of losing it. I found myself grappling with a perplexing paradox in their behavior. Some days my fear overshadowed my curiosity, while on other days the reverse was true. Although convention dictates that space represents the ultimate frontier, I hold a contrary opinion. Is space vaster? Certainly. Is it more devoid? Unquestionably. However, if I were compelled to opt between being stranded in space and adrift at sea, I would opt for the cosmos without hesitation. Up there, at least, I have stars and other luminous entities to maintain my sanity, to serve as a reminder of my visual acuity. But submerged in the profound blue depths, such solace eludes me. Only an endless expanse of blue and black stretches ahead interminably. Much like a gravitational singularity, it constitutes a chasm that swallows and forever withholds.